A drop of sweat beaded down my forehead as I twisted my wrist as hard as I could. The last remaining screw that held the doll chip together refused to budge. Why do they have to use such antiquated ways of manufacturing these things? I knew it was to keep someone from attempting what I was doing now, but it still pissed me off. The studio was quiet, and most of the dolls had left for the day. The absence of windows had turned the studio into an oven. We'd managed to finish recording the scenes, and the sweat had added a nice touch I could tune up later, but I was desperate to peel off my clothes and take a hot shower. The screw wouldn't go any further. If I pushed any harder, I might pierce the casing and render the chip useless. They weren't expensive, but I couldn't afford to replace them. My first 2 BDs had only been in circulation for a week, and our account hadn't grown much yet. I decided to risk a little effort. The casing creaked but didn't crack. The screw started to twist, my grip slipped, and I jabbed the end of the screwdriver into my palm. A bolt of pain seared across my hand as a thin trail of blood spilled from my skin. "Carajo!" I shouted. Footsteps rushed towards me. "Are you alright, Judy?" "Fuck!" "Yeah, I'm fine," I hissed, clutching at my hand. "Thanks, Katie." It was a bald-faced lie, as I wanted to keep screaming, but instead, I grit my teeth and grabbed a rag off of the floor so I could stop the bleeding. "Is there anything I can do?" I looked at Katie. The woman, was even more beautiful in person than on BD, but her innocence hadn't been exaggerated. The streets would have chewed her up alive if I hadn't intervened. "No," I shook my head. "Not unless you want to reprogram the rest of these fucking things for me." I pointed at the chip on the floor. Katie's eyes widened. I guess I could try to. I'm just not sure." "Katie, I'm joking with you." "Oh." I sighed and surveyed the scene. Tools littered the floor. The chips belonging to Roxanne and the other veterans were easy to open. But I'd been dismayed to discover some of the newer chips were of a different manufacturer. I knew I could reprogram them once I had access to the hardware inside. Getting there was the challenge. "You seem real smart with this stuff." Kinda, I admitted. "I've got some experience with these things." "Oh?" Katie raised an eyebrow. "You were a doll?" "No, but I used to work at Clouds and did work on them. Tech problems, compatibility issues, all that kind of stuff." Katie looked at the mess on the floor and shook her head. "Don't think I could ever figure out how all this stuff works." I smiled. She was so unsure of herself it was hard not to recognize a glimmer of my younger self in her. Confidence, that's what she needed. "Sure you can. It's easy. Look here." I picked up one of the chips, and after wiping some of the grime off on my cargo pants, I held it up for her to see. "See this? This is the processor. It's basically the little computer inside the chip that runs everything. And this here," I pointed towards a tiny plastic cube protruding from the chip, "is the SPU." "SPU?" "Sensory Processing Unit," I explained. Its job is to read everything the chip is picking up from the sensory feeds and then send that data to the processor to figure out what to do with it. "Oh, I get it." "Really?" Katie's smile faltered. "No, not really." "Then just say so," I chuckled. "Don't be afraid to speak up." "Okay, I will. So, how does the processor know what to do with all the data?" Sorry if that's a gonk question. Just forget it." My heart broke at how easily Katie retracted from her own question. "Don't need to apologize for nothing. I just told you to speak up, didn't I? And it's not a gonk question at all. In fact, hang on a sec." I opened my palm and peeled back the rag. The fabric was coated in blood, but the cut itself seemed to have mostly stopped. After folding the rag to expose some unsoiled cloth, I closed my fist around it again and brought the chip close to her face. "Alright, so basically, this little processor has all kinds of coding in it that tells it what to do with the data. At Clouds, this means it'll control everything the doll does when they're with a client. And the doll isn't awake? Nope." I didn't want to scare Katie by explaining that the coding wasn't foolproof. Sometimes a doll would wake up during an encounter. In most cases, the client would stop as the mood quickly wore off, but every so often. I shuddered to think I'd nearly sent Katie off to that lifestyle. Back when I'd worked at Clouds, it had been a whorehouse, but the dolls were looked after. Things seemed to have changed. "That's kinda creepy," Katie said. "What happens if something goes wrong?"
"Come on, what she went through, I wouldn't call it giving up."
I don't know why I suddenly felt lightheaded. The sight of blood certainly didn't bother me. "The program will shut things down and end the session." "That makes sense." Seems like these things are pretty powerful. Can they do more besides controlling dolls? Now that's a Nova question. They sure as hell can. With the right programming, these chips can turn someone into a world-class sous chef, a graduate-level professor, or even a combat-ready soldier. The memory of my first revolt at Cloud suddenly sprang to mind. I didn't have a clue what I'd been doing back then. The idea had come to me at Lizzie's. What if I reprogrammed the doll chips to make them experts in combat instead of sex? It was a wild thought, but it had worked until the claws had returned in force to take back what was theirs. If only I'd thought further ahead. That's pretty Nova. So why aren't these things used all over the place? Or are they, and I just don't know it? No, they're not. The tech itself is pretty cheap, but the programming is a real bitch. It's complicated, and there's not too many people out there willing to tune themselves out for a portion of their lives just to get through the day. Well, not yet, at least. I was excited to see how interested Katie was in what I was saying. She wasn't humoring me the way V would when I explained something and was met with a glassy look behind her eyes. Tell you what, how about I show you how some of these things work? What? You heard me. But I don't worry about it. I put my good arm over her. It's good to know how to do something in life besides all of this. After all, even the best editor can't do much with lousy porn. It's a turnoff. Our laughter was interrupted when the doors swung open and Roxanne sprinted inside with an enormous grin on her face. Did you hear the news? Clouds is closed. There were only 3 simple words, but I needed to hear them again. What? Clouds is shut down. Or at least they're closed until further notice. Apparently the place has been a ghost town since we left. I tasted victory on my lips, only this time it wouldn't be fleeting. Corpo life might be something I could never strive for, but I'd still learned a valuable lesson about business. If you needed employees and didn't have them, you were fucked. Holy shit, I exclaimed. Even though I was still nursing my cut, we somehow found ourselves in an awkward hug. Thank you, Judy, for everything. It seemed overly dramatic to be so close to tears. We'd only succeeded in shutting down a whorehouse, and there were plenty of others scattered across Night City, but we'd done it by playing by the rules. If only it hadn't come with such a high cost. Roxanne shouldn't have been thanking me. What did I do besides create the whole fucking mess at Clouds in the first place? Dolls had lost their lives. And Evelyn. I rubbed Roxanne's back. We did this together. Fuck that! Roxanne pulled away with a serious expression on her face. This was all you. I beamed with pride. Yes, it had carried a high price, but I'd finally succeeded at something. And that's not all. Roxanne took a step back and tilted her face. Take one last look at these freckles. I got myself an appointment at the Ripper doc to finally get real skin. Roxanne, I'm happy for you and all, but you know you don't need that, right? You're beautiful just the way you are. It felt like a tired compliment that had been paid to her dozens of times throughout her life, but at least it was true coming from me. Something flashed behind Roxanne's eyes. I appreciate that, Jude, but I've been wanting this ever since I was a little kid. You know what they used to call me when I was young? Poxan.
Judy, Judy, watch out for her cooties.
Oh, Roxanne, that's terrible. I don't know why kids are like that all the time. It's okay. They were just kids. But I want to get rid of them. I've been looking at myself in the mirror all these years, and all I've ever seen looking back at me is Poxan. Because of you, I can finally change that. I wanted to grab Roxanne by the shoulders and talk some sense into her. She was wrong. The only person who could define her was herself. But those words, because of me. A proud smile crossed my face. I'm really happy I could help. So I take it you'll be out for a few days then. Yeah, is that okay? Of course, I laughed. This place ain't Clouds and it never will be. Take all the time you need and I'll figure something out. You're the best, Jude. Yeah, she is. Surprised by Katie's sudden interjection into the conversation, I pulled her close so my arms were draped over both of them. We're the best. Such a cheesy line, but I didn't care. I'd not only established a successful business, well, once Eddie started pouring in, but I was improving people's lives. I hadn't felt like this since I joined the Mox. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs that I, Judy Álvarez, had done something to change the world for good. But I'd settle for calling V to share the good news. I got a caller, I announced, taking out my holo. It was hard to keep my expectations in check as I waited for V to pick up. She wouldn't be as excited as I was about clouds, but she'd be thrilled to know her belief in me had been well placed. But when V didn't answer, I sent her a quick message summing things up. I checked my holo and was glad to see it was closing time. Think I'm gonna scoot on home. The two of you are welcome to stick around if you want. Roxanne shook her head. I just swung by to tell you the good news in person since you'd been working so hard. Think I'm gonna head home and celebrate with a tall drink. I glanced at Katie and it occurred to me I didn't know if she had a place to live. I'd just assumed she was shacking up in a mega building, but perhaps I could solve one more problem before the day was done. Katie, how about it? Huh? Do you want to stick around? You can always stay here if you need a place to crash. Why wasn't I asking her to come home with me? V would go ballistic for sure, but I could easily persuade her. But I was getting ahead of myself. Where would she sleep? The couch? That was V's spot until I hauled her off to bed. The spare room could be made up as an extra bedroom, but I'd need to clean it out first, and we'd need a plan to get Katie on her feet. I nudged Katie when she didn't answer. Stick around as long as you need. Seriously. There are clean sheets in the back. I can't promise it won't be a little creepy in here at night, but it beats the streets. No, I mean, that's fine. Thank you so much. I smiled. Nova. After wishing them both a good evening, I set off for home. It didn't take long before the yawning started. The schedule was kicking my ass, and I still had my shift at Lizzie's to look forward to, but I wouldn't have to endure it much longer. V and I had agreed I would quit Lizzie's as soon as the eddies started rolling in. Susie would undoubtedly throw more eddies my way to get me to stay, and that would earn a hard no from me. As much as I needed sleep, I needed to focus on Álvarez Studios so I could make it into something special. And why stop at smut? Peddling orgasms was a rich enterprise, but there were so many other profitable opportunities to explore. Tourism, recreation, therapy. There was definitely an untapped market out there, but it was only a pipe dream, for now. Spotting V's motorcycle as I pulled into the lot, I hopped out of my van and bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. I was surprised to be met with silence when I walked inside. V? I turned the corner and saw V slumped over on the couch. That was strange. She had her boots and jacket on, but was out like a light. V? Still no reply. I felt a sudden stab of guilt. V was burning herself out trying to help keep us above water until the studio took off. It wouldn't be like this for much longer, but I hated knowing I'd shifted more of the burden onto her. Sighing, I started toward her, hoping the thud of my footsteps would wake her. But when they didn't, I took up my usual position and knelt next to her. I was about to nudge V awake when something under the couch caught my eye. A plain white pill. Confused, I picked it up and examined it. The pill had a chalky texture and I could make out faint markings on it. I had the sudden urge to race into the kitchen and pitch it down the drain so I wouldn't have to think about it, but instead, I looked back at V and studied her clothes, a part of me already knowing what I would find, and sure enough, there it was. Peeking out from her jacket pocket was a small capsule, similar to the kind pharmaceutical meds were distributed in. I don't know why I was suddenly being so careful not to wake V as I reached over and slid it from her pocket. The pills inside rattled as I squinted to read the label. Butaculide H. Beauties? What the fuck was she doing with these? The label didn't have anyone's name printed on it, but they looked like a legitimate prescription, right down to the Night City Medical Center logo. Looking back at the pill, I could make out the faint imprint of the letters BH followed by a 5. There was no sign that V would wake anytime soon. I shifted my gaze towards her hollow she'd set on the table. Knowing I was tempting fate and there would be hell to pay if she caught me, I picked it up and accessed her mail. V's inbox was cluttered with contacts and messages, few of which I recognized. I fidgeted nervously, keeping a watchful eye on V as I continued my search for answers. One caught my eye, but as I went to open it, the capsule slid from my hand and clattered to the floor. I panicked and hid her hollow behind my back as V rustled. I felt like I had when I'd been a teenager and had gotten caught red-handed trying to steal my grandparents' car keys. But after a few moments, her breathing deepened, and I went back to the message I'd stumbled across. I didn't recognize the name, Byron Hart, but the mention of the word beauties in the subject line grabbed my attention. What I was doing was wrong, and in the back of my mind I knew it was a symptom of something much darker going on between us, but my guilt slowly faded to shock and then to anger as I scrolled through one message after another. They were mostly the same, an ask from V and a pickup location and price from who I assumed was her dealer. I began scrolling faster and faster, my eyes widening as the trail of messages blurred past. By the time I reached the bottom, I wanted to throw the holo at her as hard as I could. No rude awakening would match the one I'd just received. She was hooked on them. Addicted to medical-grade buticulide beauties, as they were called on the streets. And this wasn't some recent development either. The earliest messages dated back to over a year ago. I did the math in my head, which only made my stomach roll. She was paying an exorbitant amount, 500 eddies per week, which meant she was burning through more than what we paid in rent each month. Fuck. She's a fucking druggie.
Think of how much she's wasted. She's the reason you've been trapped in this fucking city.
On and on it went. Before long, there was only one thing I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs. You goddamn bitch. I crudely tossed her hollow back onto the table, not caring whether she woke up or not. It landed with a loud crash, but V remained motionless. You lying cunt, I muttered as I rose to my feet and stormed out the door. I was fuming as I sped off towards Lizzie's. For once, my den would be a welcome refuge, perhaps one I'd spent the night in. It had been a long time since I'd done that, but the mere thought of being anywhere near V filled me with disgust. And to think the bitch had actually screamed that I was the one who'd end up wasting her eddies. Why the fuck did she ruin everything? As bad as it was that V had become addicted to something and had secretly pissed away our savings over the last year, the fact that she'd lied to me was what really got me. Every day she had lied, and every day I had fallen for it. Sniffling, I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I'd knock out any BDs Susie had dropped off before plowing through an all-nighter, spending every waking second editing the fuck out of my own scrolls until they were perfect. And as soon as they went on the market and took off, I'd throw all of it back in V's face. She deserved it.